Part 72. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 711. The civil strife in northern Xinjiang has temporarily ended. Prince Duanwu successfully eliminated his rival, the sixth prince, and secured his position as crown prince. Lingan stood in the Dajhan palace to report on the situation in northern Xinjiang, and by the way, he brought an unusual good news. Based on the verbal ridicule from Prince Zanruo in Dongling 2 years ago, northern Xinjiang Prince Duanwu proposed to send troops to attack Yu country, hoping to teach Yu country an unforgettable lesson, but the old emperor did not agree. Attack the Yu kingdom. Nan 11 looked at the map, her voice was calm, with a hint of ridicule. There are many barriers between northern Xinjiang and the Yu kingdom, and it is even more difficult to just use the Great Zhou dynasty, not to mention the thousands of miles away, enough people and horses. They took the road to bypass Dazhu and Dongling, all the way just to annex a small Yu kingdom. Who would believe it? If Duanwu really sent out thousands of troops because of a small grudge, it would be too impulsive, not to mention the long distance between Yu kingdom and northern Xinjiang. Just the big Zhou dynasty in the middle was enough to dissuade them. This thought. Duanwu's real intention is not to release this false news to the Yu kingdom, but to give a warning to the royal families of various countries. Yu stood beside Nan 11 and looked at the map on the case with her. The current military strength and situation are not enough to send troops to any country. But releasing this news in advance can be regarded as a notice. After many years, the troops in northern Xinjiang will be strong, and Duanwu will successfully ascend the throne. He can easily provoke wars between countries just by using the excuse of teaching Yu country a lesson. Nan 11 smiled lightly. Duanwu was able to quell the civil strife and get rid of the biggest rival to the throne within 2 years, which shows that this person is quite capable. He has the ability, but it's just a matter of how much. Yu said calmly. He spent 2 years planning to get rid of the sixth prince, and the losses during this period were not small. He himself was also seriously injured, so he needed enough time to recuperate. After a pause, in addition, the civil strife is only temporarily over. There are still 2 opponents in his reserve, and there is still good drama to watch next. My lord is right. Lingan nodded. The sixth prince of northern Xinjiang holds military power. When Duanwu left northern Xinjiang, he quickly attracted some important officials in the court, and his power can almost compete with Duanwu's branch. In addition, Zhuxiao, after returning from Dongling 2 years ago, Duanwu was really worried about some troubles caused by the court. Fortunately, he had Situ Suanju and reliable advisors around him to stabilize the court, and he bought enough time. Proved his innocence. Therefore, Duanwu's hard work over the past 2 years and the precarious situation of his reserve position are actually mostly due to Zhuxiao Pavilion. He should thank Zhuxiao Pavilion for giving him experience and the opportunity to seek life in dangerous situations. As for the next 2 princes, they will naturally come in handy when the time comes. Let Duanwu take a breath for now. Northern Xinjiang is now suffering from serious military and internal losses. Even if Duanwu is really ambitious, he will be unable to do anything for a while. Yu's voice became softer. Recruit troops, strengthen training, and cultivate cronies in the court. These all require time and effort. And this is just the premise that ambition is about to start. When everything is ready, he will find that his idea is still just a whim. The fifth prince, Duanwu Han, holds Duanwu's fatal grip. Lingan said. Let him rest for a year and a half first, and then let them continue playing when northern Xinjiang recovers a little strength. Nan 11 looked away from the map and slightly raised her gaze to look at Lingan. Duanwu Han. Yes. Lingan nodded. The Lord said that northern Xinjiang would be in civil strife for 10 years. It has only been 2 years now, and there will still be chaos in the future. Nan 11 raised her lips slightly. Not bad. The Prince Duanwu has to walk on thin ice, making him feel that he may be pulled down at any time. Since the other princes have ambitions, it is natural that they should compete fairly to see who wins in the end. Well, Rong Yu means to let Duan Mu he could not become the emperor, so no matter how long the civil strife lasted, Duan Mu Yu would only die in the end. Situ Suanju belongs to Duan Mu Yu. Once Duan Mu Yu dies, Situ Suanju will naturally die as well. Without the leader of the Situ family in northern Xinjiang, the combat effectiveness will only become weaker. In addition, years of civil strife have depleted his spiritual energy. In the past 10 years, northern Xinjiang will the internal delusion of raising troops against any country is fanciful, even the vassal country Yangguo is no longer afraid of the seemingly powerful sick cat. Nan 11 leaned on the brocade couch and marveled at Rong Yu's ability to strategize and win a victory thousands of miles away. What's the current situation in South Vietnam? Suchang is dead, Mo Lingan said. The current political situation in South Vietnam is not stable. The Su family has a great influence on the imperial power. Although the emperor got rid of Suchang, South Vietnam is also seriously injured and powerless this time. The regent of Ziki wanted to marry his daughter to Shu and use a marriage between the two countries to gain support from Shu. However, Yunting and Yeching Chen were now in charge of Shu. Ignore the ambition of the regent of Ziki. With that said, he presented several pieces of information to Rong Yu for review. Rong Yu opened it and looked at it without expression, and said in a calm tone, "So Ziki and Nanyu can't fight for the time being." Mo Lingan lowered his eyebrows and replied, "It's a bit difficult for the time being. It's not that they are incompetent, but that 11 Chi and South Vietnam are too busy to take care of themselves, and there is really no way to be stupid enough to start a war. Moreover, Lin Ao's main ambition lies in the throne. The little emperor aspires to take power after taking office, and is quickly wooing the courtiers. Several princes in the clan support the little emperor. Now Lin Ao's one wrong move means that everything will be lost, so he starts a war. It was simply out of the question for him." "Then let's wait." Rong Yu put the information on the case and said indifferently, "In the next time, we should focus on northern Xinjiang, South Vietnam, and Ziki. If the young emperor of Ziki is not Lin Ao's opponent, you can help with his help. This king wants Lin Ao and his Lin family army to be wiped out." "Yes," Mo Lingan agreed, "I'm resigning." Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 712. On the 6th day of the first lunar month, the atmosphere was extremely delicate. Firstly, the Prince Regent, who had been out of court for more than a month, actually appeared in the court on the first day of the new year. He looked in great spirits, and he still had a good understanding with Her Majesty the Queen. When facing the courtiers, his dignified and handsome face showed up. As cold and indifferent as ever, His Majesty and courage have not diminished at all. While making people feel more pressure, it also made many courtiers' secret plans come to nothing. The second one comes entirely from Xiejin. In view of the fact that a lot of things happened during the New Year holidays, which caused a great stir. In addition to the strange atmosphere in the morning meeting on this day, the ministers seemed to have held back a lot of things to say. After the routine salutes and shouts of "Long live," as soon as Her Majesty the Queen said, "If you have something to report, please leave the court." If nothing happens, all the ministers below exploded. "Your Majesty, and the Prince Regent, I have something to report." Her Majesty the Queen said calmly, "Say." "I want to impeach Xiejin, the minister of the Ministry of Punishment," the censor said impassionedly and fiercely. As the direct son of the Xie family, an important minister in the court, and the former #1 scholar, Xiejin is a noble son who has read the books of sages. He has outstanding literary talent and outstanding knowledge. As a human being, and highly respected by His Majesty and the regent, he should set an example, start a family, shine on his family, and be a role model for thousands of students. However, he did not think about the right path and openly interacted closely with Prince Yao, and also spread his feelings that are not allowed in the world. It is against ethics and morals, it is really shameful. Your Majesty and the Prince Regent should make a decision. If you continue to be in charge of the criminal department with this kind of behavior, I am afraid that in the future, the men in Dongling will have similar ideas and cut off their sleeves, which will ruin our Dongling. The foundation of the mausoleum. I hope Her Majesty the Queen will understand. Please make a decision. Xiejin stood among the civil servants, listening to the excited and indignant words of the imperial censor. His face was very calm, and he was even thinking, did he not understand the meaning of the words imperial decree granting marriage? Impeach. Is it to impeach him, or to blatantly defy the imperial edict and question the authority of Her Majesty the Queen? Your Majesty the Queen, another censor followed, I also impeach Xiejin, the Minister of the Ministry of Punishments. As the head of the Ministry of Punishments, he blatantly violated the laws of the country and knowingly violated them. He is not qualified to govern the law. Your Majesty, please make a decision. I impeach Xie Shaofu for failing to teach his son. I impeach the Prince of Huainan for disregarding military regulations and discipline, and disregarding the face of the royal family. There seemed to be an explosion in the main hall. The ministers took 6 days off during the New Year holiday. They originally wanted to spend time with their parents, wives, and children, and fulfill their filial piety and responsibilities as a father. Unexpectedly, they ended up taking 6 days off due to the incident between Xiejin and Xianyuan Yao. There was so much backlog of dissatisfaction, and all of it burst out at once. In the final analysis, there is only one key point. Xiejin and Xianyuan Yao are both angry and shameless. They have committed a heinous crime and deserve to be punished. Xiejin secretly thought, if His Majesty and His Majesty were not here, would these ministers prepare some scraps and leaves to throw at him? Just like throwing those death row prisoners at Keishikao. Her Majesty the Queen sat on the dragon chair, taking her time to listen to the excitement of the crowd. The Prince Regent also listened silently without saying a word, with his arms resting on the armrests of the throne, tapping casually and rhythmically. After everyone in the hall spoke freely and expressed all their thoughts vividly, the voices gradually became quieter, and the excitement gradually calmed down. The hall became quiet. Nan 11 then said calmly, "You gentlemen, are you dissatisfied with my imperial edict?" The air froze. The ministers knelt down one after another. "I don't dare. I issued the imperial edict and the marriage was also granted by me. Are you so angry and dissatisfied because you have objections to my decision?" "I don't dare," Zouyashi said, "the person I am impeaching is Xiejin. But this marriage was agreed to by me and the regent." Nan 11 smiled lightly, "You ignored the imperial edict to grant the marriage, and instead kept impeaching Xiejin. Is it because you have long-standing grudges against me and the regent, or are you just trying to take advantage of it? Can we get rid of Xiejin?" After the words fell, the atmosphere stagnated. Zouyashi quickly kowtowed, "I have no such intention. I hope Your Majesty will understand clearly. Your Majesty is wise. The regent is wise. I shouldn't be considered a saint," Nan 11 said calmly, "I just gave you such a marriage. I didn't expect that it would arouse such great resentment among the Qing family. It seems that I should reflect on it." Resentment. The ministers were horrified. "I must die. Who dares to be angry with the king? Doesn't this sentence put them on the fire rack to roast? Reporting to Your Majesty, I dare not question the imperial edict. It is just that since ancient times, yin and yang have been harmonious, the universe has been in order, and the order has been maintained and the descendants have continued. I am worried that if this sets a precedent, someone will imitate it in the future, which will be detrimental to the family and the country." Nan 11 smiled lightly, Master Zhou, if your son also likes men, would you agree? Zhou Yushi said forcefully, I will never agree. In that case, what are you still worried about? Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. I believe that most people in the world have the same idea as you. Not only the Qing family, but even younger men should have no interest in imitating it. Something like this. Zhou Yushi was suddenly speechless, and the others couldn't help but fell silent. To be honest, it seems that such a thing cannot be imitated casually. After all, men usually like beauties. Who would show affection to a man without any problem? The Qing family governs the country and brings peace to the world. All the ministers are members of the Qing family that I trust. They have studied poetry and books for many years and have a deep understanding of the ways of the sages. They also understand the principle that the father is the guide for the son. If you cannot even manage your own family, you will not be able to manage yourself. If his son is not well disciplined, then this person will definitely not have much ability to govern a party. Nan 11 said in a calm tone, things like broken sleeves have been rare since ancient times, but they are not unheard of. If I had true feelings, I would not do it. Objection: if there is a provision on this in the laws of the country and the country, it can be lifted. There was silence in the hall. If you blindly do something that goes beyond secular rules just because you are seeking excitement or following the trend, then I can think that this is a manifestation of unhealthy family traditions. When the imperial courts elects officials, people with unhealthy family traditions will not matter how knowledgeable or capable they are. I won't reuse anyone who is extraordinary. The ministers lowered their heads and listened with awe-inspiring expressions. For a moment, no one dared to refute. Also, Nan 11's eyes swept away, her voice became calmer, but full of authority. Real feelings are also based on mutual consent, just like when a man marries a woman. If one party does not agree, the other party will take it by force. Then this kind of behavior is also a criminal act that ignores the law. It is not tolerated by the court's laws and should be dealt with how it should be dealt with. Does Mr. Zhou think that it is reasonable for a man and a woman to get married, so a man can rape a woman in the street? Zhou Yushi said, I don't dare. Nan 11 said, do you still have any concerns? Lin Yushi hesitated for a moment and said, I wonder what King Huainan thinks about this matter. What King Huainan thinks is a matter between them and his son, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. Nan 11 said, I can only guarantee that this matter will not cause King Huainan to be dissatisfied with the court, and will not let the military power in his hands become a threat. You don't need to worry about anything else. Yes. Concerning the imperial decree granting marriage, I don't want to hear anyone express objections in front of me in the future. Nan 11 said in a calm tone, do you remember? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 713. The first day of the court meeting after the new year started with the ministers' passionate speeches and ended with a unanimous response, as if the sky had thundered several times in a row, crackling as if a violent storm was about to fall from the sky. However, before the dark clouds gathered, the sky had cleared up, which was a shocking surprise. Until the sound of adjourn the court rang out, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But the end of the morning court did not mean that the matter was over. When Prime Minister Xie was about to turn around and leave the hall, many colleagues surrounded him. Prime Minister Xie turned his head and looked at the left side. Mr. Zhang, Mr. Wang, and Mr. Su all looked sympathetic. Looking at the right side, Mr. Wu, Prime Minister Liu, Minister Ye, and all the cabinet colleagues looked pitiful and indescribable. Prime Minister. Mr. Zhang hesitated. Prime Minister Xie raised his eyebrows, what for? Although as parents, we certainly don't want to see such a thing happen, but since it has already happened, we can only mourn and accept the change. Mourn and accept the change? This is a bit too much. Prime Minister Xie said indifferently, the Xie family had a good year. No one died. Even the servants and maids are alive and well. If Lord John couldn't speak, believe it or not, I would ask you to mourn immediately. Lord Zhang's face changed, and he smiled awkwardly. I made a mistake, Lord Prime Minister, please forgive me. Lord Wu said earnestly, Lord Prime Minister is not in a good mood, we can understand, after all, such a thing is not glorious. What kind of thing is not glorious? Prime Minister Xie interrupted Lord Wu and smiled faintly, I think it is glorious. My Jinner has also set a precedent that has never been seen before and will never be seen again. Let your Majesty grant marriage for this special relationship, which shows the love of Her Majesty the Queen and the Regent for Jinner. Lord Wu was speechless. Is this self-consolation? You don't have to pretend that you don't care, just show your sadness. After all, no one wants this to happen. Cabinet Master Sen comforted him gently, the Xie family is prominent, but it would be a pity if there is no inheritance. Master Sen is wrong. How could the Xie family not have an inheritance? Prime Minister Lu finally spoke for Prime Minister Xie, the Xie family has other illegitimate sons, so the bloodline is not broken after all, right? Prime Minister Xie nodded nonchalantly, Prime Minister is right. But I'm really not sad, you worry too much. The people who came around all had an expression of I understand, and they all thought that Prime Minister Xie was just forcing a smile at this time, not wanting to be laughed at by others, and they were so self-righteous that people wanted to beat them up. Prime Minister Xie was too lazy to pay attention to these idiots. However, he suddenly thought of something, stopped his steps, and suddenly sighed deeply, with a look of melancholy and regret on his face. Lord Wu hurriedly asked, what's wrong with Lord Xie? Prime Minister Xie looked depressed. If Lord Prime Minister has any unhappiness, you can speak out. Lord Sen of the cabinet said, we won't laugh at you. The adults comforted each other, all deceiving themselves as if the fierce impeachment of Xie Jin just now had never happened. In fact, if it was really an impeachment, it was not. The real purpose of this group of old foxes in the court was just to test the attitude of Her Majesty the Queen and the Regent. Compared with the messy feelings of Xie Jin's legitimate son, they wanted to know whether His Majesty and the Regent really had the intention to deal with the Xie family, so that they could cater to the Emperor's heart in the future and make plans for their own careers. Actually, I didn't want to say it. Prime Minister Xie turned his head and took a look. He seemed to have some concerns and lowered his voice involuntarily. Although Jinner's incident was not what I wanted, it has happened after all. The imperial decree to grant marriage is a foregone conclusion and cannot be changed. I can only accept it. But you may not know the cause of this incident. Cause? Is there any other hidden secret? The adults were immediately shocked and looked at Prime Minister Xie with burning eyes. Prime Minister Xie coughed lightly, not wanting to admit that the expressions of these colleagues at this time looked really stupid. I'm reminding you today, but you can't talk nonsense when you go out, otherwise the charge of speculating on the Emperor's mind will be enough for you to drink a pot. Everyone expressed their opinions. Master Xie, please tell us, we promise to keep it confidential. Yes, we will never leak a word. What is the reason? Prime Minister Xie was silent for a moment, as if it was difficult to speak, and sighed again. It was originally Jinner who overestimated her own abilities. Overestimated her own abilities? The ministers listened attentively, fearing that they might miss some important information. After Jinner won the first place in the imperial examination, she was deeply favored by His Majesty and the Regent. She was full of vigor and ambition, and even wanted to enter His Majesty's harem. What? Harem? The ministers were shocked. I guess His Majesty's sudden marriage decree should be related to this, and the marriage decree must not have been issued by His Majesty willingly. It might have been the Regent's idea. Prime Minister Xie said, with a look of worry on his face, so if you don't want your sons to be married to a man inexplicably in the future. The faces of the ministers changed, and they couldn't help but think of the queen's constant defense of Xiejin and Xian Yuanyao in the palace just now, and emphasized the seriousness of the marriage decree, and repeatedly stated that she and the regent agreed to this matter, so, this matter was actually entirely the regent's idea? The regent has always been very possessive, domineering and controlling the harem of the queen. No matter how they persuaded, they could not let the queen have one more person in the harem. When the ministers thought of the memorial submitted before the new year, they felt cold all over. "It's okay, Lord Ye said with some relief, my Chang'er has already married, and he will not be granted another marriage." "That's not necessarily true," the Prime Minister said indifferently. "What if he grants a handsome young man?" "Oh, no, handsomeness is not important. What's important is that even if the emperor grants your son a servant as a concubine, it will not sound good to the Ye family." Lord Ye's face suddenly changed. The other ministers suddenly thought of the fact that His Majesty had given Xiejin several handsome boys in succession. It seemed that it had not been long since then, and they were still quite impressed. They did not expect that Xiejin's legitimate son would actually be given to a man, and a royal noble. The Prince of Huainan is also a rare young talent and a young military commander. His Majesty's marriage has solved two candidates for the Empress at once. Oh, that's not right, Xian Yuanyao is a royal noble, and it is impossible for him to be a candidate for the Empress. But he still suffered from the disaster. The ministers felt a chill on their backs, and they couldn't help but have the urge to run away. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 714. Xiejin stood outside the hall, facing the complicated or sympathetic looks of all the adults. He nodded with a calm expression and smiled, without any ruthless vixen in him. "My lords, walk slowly and watch your steps. Don't fall. Thank you for your hard work, master. Please take care of yourself in the future." The impeachment of Mr. Xie just now was out of necessity. Zouyashi reached out and patted Xiejin on the shoulder. "Thank you very much." Xiejin smiled slightly. "It doesn't matter." Lord Wu sighed and looked at the junior with a loving expression. On the regent's side, "Lord Xie, please bear with me." Xiejin's expression paused, then he nodded gracefully and calmly. "Sir, Mr. Xie." Mr. Sen, the cabinet minister, sighed helplessly and reached out to pat his shoulder. "I have wronged you." "Younger generation will not be wronged." Xiejin always had an impeccable smile. He looked like a handsome nobleman with impeccable appearance and demeanor. "If you want me to die, I have to die, not to mention it is just a gift, it's a marriage, you adults don't have to feel aggrieved on my behalf." Lin Yushi also wanted to say something, but Xiejin smiled lightly and said, "My lords, I will not take it to heart about the impeachment of this junior today." Lin Yushi shuddered slightly, then nodded and said goodbye. "I will leave first, please excuse me, Mr. Xie." The adults left one after another until no one was left. Xie Xiaofu said quietly, "My father is so worried about you." Xiejin turned to look at his father standing beside him and bowed deeply. "A child is unfilial." "Okay," Xie Xiaofu sneered, "everyone is gone, so there is no need to act." "Who are you acting for?" Xiejin straightened up with a smile, stood on the palace steps, looked at the ministers who were still talking to each other after walking away, and said in a calm tone, "I should be able to calm down for a while in the morning. Let's see if any of these ministers dare to give up advice every now and then to persuade His Majesty to choose the Emperor's husband." Xiejin sighed deeply. It is rare to see a loyal minister like him who considers his lord. He has even solved the problem of His Majesty's harem. Why can't the Lord reward him well? "Go home." Mr. Xie walked down the steps of the palace. "This matter has been settled for the time being. The discussion among the public will continue for a while, but it doesn't matter. It's not a problem at all to you." Xiejin was silent for a moment, then suddenly smiled. "It's time to change the direction of the discussion. After today, the content of the discussion will probably become: it turns out that the legitimate son of the Xia family wanted to become the husband of Her Majesty the Queen, and then he was angered by the possessive regent and married him to the Prince of Huainan. Xiejin found it interesting just thinking about it. Back home, Xiejin walked in and saw Xiejun, the eldest son of Xia, who was about to go out. He was silent for a moment, then smiled playfully. "Brother, are you going out?" Xiejun smiled faintly. "Well, I have something to do when I go out." "What's going on?" Xiejin raised his eyebrows. "Let's go and hear how the rumors are going." Xiejun's expression changed. "Ninth brother, what does this mean?" "What do you mean you don't understand?" Xiejin clicked his tongue. "Before the imperial edict came down, the rumors were spread by my eldest brother, right?" Xiejun subconsciously wanted to refute. Xiejin smiled pityingly and said, "After all these years, my eldest brother is as stupid as ever. He is so stupid that I can't bear to do anything to you." Xiejun's jaw tightened, and his face turned green and white. "Do you know why I said you are stupid?" Xiejin walked into the house, his voice calm and calm. "If you don't understand now, it doesn't matter, I will let you understand soon." Xiejun had a sullen face and stared at his slender back without saying a word. Xiejin walked into the mansion calmly, and on the way to Jinyuan, he met the boy who saluted him and said lightly, "Go and call the fourth young master over." "Yes." Xiejin, the fourth son of the Xia family, is the son of his aunt He. He is 25 years old this year. He has also bullied Xiejin since he was a child. However, he is smarter than Xiejun and Xieming. Knowing that his father is very fond of Xiejin, he does not allow anyone to touch him. After a hair on his head, and Xiejin himself was also a shady master, and most people were no match for him, the fourth son of the Xia family stopped all his thoughts and quietly made an airwood sculpture without any sense of existence. Over the years, Xiejun has thought about getting rid of Xiejin from time to time. Even though he is just a bastard, he is still the eldest son of Xie. As long as Xiejin, the only legitimate son, is gone, the Xie family will still have to pass it on to the eldest son, so he is always uneasy. Points, as the saying goes, the thief will never die. The second young master, Xieming, is not ambitious, but has a mean mouth. In Xiejin's words, he is actually a bitch. He wants to be beaten from time to time, so when there is nothing wrong, he always has to deal with some things that deserve a beating, so that Xiejin can practice. These two people were always jumping up and down in front of Xiejin a few years ago, so they suffered the most from Xiejin's hands. After Xiejin got the first prize in the examination, they seemed to have stopped talking a lot. In fact, it was mainly because Xiejin was busy with official duties and cultivating a relationship with Yao Yao, and had no time to pay attention to them. Unexpectedly, Xiejun noticed what happened between Xiejin and Xianyuan Yao, so he waited for the New Year holiday to spread the news. There were many people in restaurants and tea shops, so the news spread quickly, and soon the whole city was in trouble. He thought he was smart and wanted to use this incident to ruin Xiejin's reputation. It would be better if he could be cursed by everyone in the streets and impeached by all the civil and military officials in the court, so that the queen could strip him of his official position in a fit of anger and demote him to a commoner. However, it is not as good as God. As soon as the rumors spread, Her Majesty the Queen issued a decree granting marriage, which caused the fermenting rumors to boil. Unexpectedly, this matter was not painful at all for Xiejin, and he even knew the person who made the rumors so quickly. Who is? Xiejin had always doubted whether these pigs were his father's biological blood. How could he be so stupid that people and gods were outraged? However, although the sons of the Xia family inherited their aunt's stupidity, they do have a bit of their father's appearance in appearance, so they can only be suspicious, and with Xia Xiaofu's temperament, if the son is really not his biological son, I'm afraid they drowned together with their biological mother long ago. How could they be allowed to be so stupid now? After returning to Jinyuan, he took off his official robe and changed into a light regular robe. Xiejin sat down on the couch in front of the window. The maid made tea and brought it over. She bowed and left without saying a word. Xiejin was holding the freshly brewed hot tea, frowning, and slowly tapping the cup with the tea lid. He heard the servant standing in front of the door reporting, "Master, the fourth young master is here." Xiejin's voice was calm, "Let him come in." Yes, the boy turned and looked out the door. Master asked the fourth young master to come in. In the bluestone courtyard, the man in a blue robe nodded slightly, took a deep breath, shook hands nervously, and walked towards the house. The main text is actually the end. You can read the rest as an extra. Babies like to watch Jin Yao. I will write more about their plots in the future to satisfy their wishes. Good night. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 715. Xie Zheng walked into the room, looked at Xiejin leaning against the window, and said uneasily, "Ninth brother, you are looking for me." Xiejin raised his eyes and looked at him, "Come and sit." There was no emotion or anger in the faint voice, which made people feel uncertain for a moment. Xie Zheng walked over and stood awkwardly. He hadn't spoken to Xiejin for a long time, and he had rarely even seen him twice in a year. This time, he really didn't understand why he was looking for him. Xiejin pointed to the chair opposite him, "Sit." Xie Zheng then sat down and put his hands on his legs nervously. "Nine, what do you want from me, ninth brother?" Xiejin took a sip of tea and said in a lazy voice, "Fourth brother is not married yet." Xie Zheng looked at him in confusion, but still said, "No, I haven't found the right one." In fact, the marriage of the bastards in the family was not allowed to be decided by herself. Xie had no interest in controlling these bastards, so she naturally had no time to think about their marriage, so she delayed it. Ever since she became the mistress of the Xie family, and I don't treat him harshly. If the concubines want to study, they naturally go to their fathers. Xie doesn't care about this. Except when Xiejin was bullied by them when he was a child, Xie would occasionally come forward a few times. Later, when Xiejin was a few years older, he could basically solve his own problems. Not much intersection. When the bastards were young, they felt like this was good. No one cared about them, no one asked, they didn't have to look at their aunt's face to live their lives, they didn't have to worry about morning and evening every day, and they didn't have to be made things difficult for them every day. It's just that the bastards were always bad at learning. Even though he was living a good life, he always liked to cause trouble for Xiejin. He was taught a lesson by Xiejin many times and severely punished by Xie Xiaofu just because he tried to commit suicide. Apart from having little status in the family, it's generally pretty good. It's just that after adulthood, the disadvantages of no one asking about it come out. Xiejun, the oldest, is already over 30, and Xie Ming is also nearly 30. So far, none of the bastards in the Xie family have gotten married, and the concubine was married off, because it was not suitable for an old girl to stay at home. As for these bastards, Xie Xiaofu seemed to have forgotten their existence. However, marriage matters are usually dictated by the parents and the matchmaker, and the concubines in the backyard have no right to make the decision. If Xie doesn't care about it, where will they get married? So it has been delayed until now. If Mr. Xie and Xie continue to ignore it, it may be possible that they will never marry. Xiejin knew it in his heart, but he didn't expose it. His mother didn't care about it, so why did he care about it? They love marriage or not. But today he called Xiejin here because of his marriage. Xiejin adjusted to a comfortable position and leaned on the brocade couch. Fourth brother should be aware of the rumors that have been spreading in the past 2 days. Rumors? Xiejin looked a little embarrassed, then nodded hesitantly, "I know a little bit." Although he didn't go out much, Xiejun and Xieming had told him in front of him, and he knew that most of those rumors were true. Fourth brother, go and choose a suitable woman to get married, Xiejin said calmly. Family background is not important, as long as she is innocent. It is better to choose a woman who is virtuous, smart, and able to manage the family and live a good life. She should be honest and responsible in temperament, and don't be arrogant. Just a moth will do. Ninth brother, Xiezhen was a little surprised that he suddenly mentioned the matter of getting married, and then he lowered his head and said, the mother should make the final decision on marriage, and the eldest brother and the second brother have not yet dash. You don't need to pay attention to them. I'll take care of my mother's side. Xiejin looked at him expressionlessly. I'm discussing your marriage with you now. Xiezhen pursed his lips. Ninth brother, please tell me. If you can give birth to a son after we get married, let me raise him, Xiejin said. As long as you stay calm, you, your aunt, and your wife will be able to live comfortably in this life, and your child can inherit the Xie family business, and you are still his father, but you are not allowed to interfere in the process of teaching your children. Xiezhen looked at him in surprise, almost unable to believe what he heard. Ninth brother. Inherit the Xie family business. Surprised, Xiejin raised his eyebrows. I won't have any children in this life. If you adopt your child and let me raise it, he will be the direct grandson of the Xie family. Aren't you happy? Xiezhen shook his head subconsciously. No, not, I. There is no rush about this matter. You can go back and think about it carefully. Xiejin drank tea with his eyes closed and his posture was leisurely. But there are a few important points for me to remember clearly. The wife you want to marry must have a clean financial background and a law-abiding character. You'd better be smart, otherwise I'm worried that the child will inherit your stupid and timid character, and it won't be able to be nurtured, and I will have to find another child to raise, which is a waste of my time. Xiezhen nervously clenched his hands, unclenched them, and clenched them again. He couldn't believe that such a good thing would happen to him. But don't be too anxious about choosing your wife. You can choose slowly. I'm just telling you my decision for the time being, so that you have enough time to think about it, Xiejin said lazily. After all, I am still young and can wait. It is true that you are still young, just after the age of weak crown, and you will not be anxious until you are 30 years old. Xiezhen nodded slightly. I understand. One more thing, you don't have to ask after the child is born. You and your wife can discuss it by yourselves. Don't think about the child every now and then, and don't cry, make a scene, or even hang yourself. If you really do that, don't blame me for turning hostile. Xiezhen's face changed slightly. Does this mean that they can't take a look at the child after it is born, or see each other often? The last point, I will name the child, and I will decide everything. You can be his father, but you have no right to control anything about him until he comes of age. Xiejin seemed to see his hesitation, and added casually, don't worry, I won't completely stop you from seeing the child. After all, you are still his father. I will let the child know who his parents are. Xiezhen was silent for a moment, and nodded slowly. These requirements are actually very overbearing, but for the weight of the 4 words inherit the family business, this bit of overbearing can be completely ignored. Go back and think about it, Xiejin said. Don't rush to reply me, tell me when you have thought it through. Xiezhen nodded and said, thank you, ninth brother. Xiejin looked at him calmly and drank tea. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 716. A new year begins. The weather in the first month is still cold. It is not suitable for flower viewing or outing. It is a month for going to court as usual. Xiejin is busy with court affairs. In addition to being in charge of the Ministry of Justice, he also manages the Ministry of Revenue part-time. Xian Yuanyao spends most of his time in the military camp. He goes to Xie's house once every 10 days or half a month to spend a night with Xie Jin. The discussion in the imperial city gradually calmed down. Everything was as Xie Jin expected. The rumors died down after the most boiling period. When officials discussed less and less about the affairs between Xie Jin and Xian Yuanyao, the discussion among the people gradually decreased until it slowly disappeared. Even if someone occasionally mentioned it, it was just mysterious with a little interest and novelty after knowing it later, which was not enough to cause trouble to anyone. At the same time, Rong Yu and Nan 11 also keenly noticed that the atmosphere in the court was very different from before. Needless to say, the young upstarts have always been conscientious for the country and the people. The elders of the two dynasties who had been persuading the empress to fill the harem with people also settled down, as if they had suddenly silenced themselves. They handled official business in the morning court every day, reported things early, and never made trouble when there was nothing to do. Her Majesty the Empress and the Regent were extremely satisfied with this. If I had known that granting Xie Jin a marriage would have this effect, the marriage should have been granted earlier. Her Majesty the Empress said so with a slightly joking tone. Rong Yu, this is also a credit for Xie Jin, do you want to record it and reward him? In order to prevent him from getting cocky, I won't reward him, Rong Yu said, but you can give him and Xian Yuanyao a few more days of vacation. Although the credit should actually be credited to Prime Minister Xie, after all, the reason Xie Jin wanted to enter the harem, so he was granted a marriage, came from Prime Minister Xie, just like a bucket of cold water poured over the ministers' heads. Whether they believe it or not, the deterrent effect is there, and those ministers will be very obedient for a long time to come. As for the regent, who was accused of being extremely possessive and occupying the empress's palace and jealous, he said that he had no emotional fluctuations. As long as the result was what he wanted, the process and means did not matter. Time passed day by day, and it was the end of February in a blink of an eye. On the second birthday of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, Nan 11 held a small family banquet in the Dajhan Palace. The Sizhufang made a few new clothes for Hao. A bright yellow thin jacket made him look noble and exquisite. In Xian Yuanyao's words, he is the immortal prince who should grow up in the heavenly palace. Nan 11 likes others' praise for Hao, even if it is a little flattering. She is happy, especially from these men who flatter others and never appear hypocritical. She will say, the regent has trained them well. Look at these guys, how good they are at talking. Nan 11 is happy, and Rong Yu will of course be happy too. He took the opportunity to ask Xian Yuanyao about his recent arrangements in the military camp. He learned that the formation drill had been successfully completed and came to an end. After the routine physical exercises, he only needed to do routine physical exercises. He was particularly generous and gave him 5 days of vacation, but there were conditions. How is for you, Rong Yu stuffed the little prince to Xian Yuanyao, take him to walk around the city during the day and see the scenery. To put it bluntly, it is necessary to experience the people's sentiments from an early age. In addition, Rong Yu also assigned a task to Xie Jin. Hao's 2-year-old birthday has passed, Hao's martial arts class can start, you take snacks. Take snacks? When Xie Jin heard this, he immediately thought of the time when he and Yao Yao were kissing each other, and there was a little carrot standing in the corner, looking at them with a pair of cold and clear eyes. That scene, just thinking about it makes my scalp numb. However, the master's words cannot be disobeyed, and the queen's belly is getting bigger and bigger. The master has to take care of the queen. They help to take care of the little prince, which is also a way to share the worries of the king, and it is indeed more important to experience the people's sentiments. So Xie Jin could only nod and agree, and comfort himself that it would be okay to go out with Yao Yao during the day, and do something more interesting at night, and then send the prince back to the palace. So after the age of 2, the prince officially had 2 more teachers. In addition to Xian Yuanqi, the prince's tutor, Xiejin, and Xian Yuanyao also acted as half martial arts masters, especially Xiejin, who went in and out of the court every day, and was asked to take the prince out to see the world every now and then in his spare time. Xiejin even wanted to take the prince to a brothel for a while, but if something unexpected happened in such a mixed place, he was worried that his only skin would not be able to withstand a beating from his master, so he gave up for the time being. Time passed day by day. In April, Dongling welcomed a distinguished guest, Rong Chuxiu, the newly appointed monarch of the Great Zhou. The visit of the Emperor of the Great Zhou was grand, and it was definitely not a light-carrying tour, nor was it a galloping journey, but a mighty guard escorted the arrival of the monarch of a country, expressing the beautiful long-cherished wish of the two countries to be friends forever. However, even though he carefully selected a season of spring when the flowers were blooming, he could not stop bad luck. Just as the imperial carriage arrived outside the Dongling imperial city, the queen in the palace had a seizure, and the midwives and palace servants took their positions and stayed in the Dajhan palace to deliver the queen. When the document of the Emperor of the Great Zhou was delivered to the palace, the minister who presented the document saw that the regent was as anxious as an ant on a hot pot, and silently suppressed the document. So the majestic king of Zhou dynasty waited outside Dongling imperial city for a long time. Fortunately, the weather was not bad at the moment, the wind was beautiful, and the sun was shining high. It was just that in the season of late spring and early summer, the golden sun was shining brightly. If you leave it in the sun for a long time, the taste won't be very pleasant. The regent had no time to pay attention to anything outside the Dajhan palace, but as the regent's confidant, Xiejin had to play the role of a confidant at this time. After reading the document, he quickly entered the Dajhan palace and reported the matter to Rong. With the permission of the regent, Xiejin quickly ordered the imperial guards from Chu Hong'ai and rode out of the city. What kind of hospitality is this in Dongling? The minister who followed Rong Chuxiu muttered in a low voice, but did not dare to say it out loud. The regent knows the news of the emperor's arrival, so he should send someone out to greet him warmly. Sending someone out to greet him enthusiastically, Rong Chuxiu, who was sitting in the car wearing a bright yellow robe, tilted his head. Are you kidding? His imperial uncle, let alone the one who now holds the power of Dongling, even if he becomes a commoner one day, he will never show enthusiasm to anyone, except in front of Nan 11. The minister who was speaking hesitated and couldn't help but mutter, even if he is not enthusiastic, the emperor is now the king of a country. It is not good for the regent to leave us in the cold outside the imperial city. Besides, we have no ill intentions and are not here to provoke. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 717. Just as he finished speaking, a dull sound of horse hooves like thunder suddenly came from the city. Rong Chuxiu was shocked and sat up straight. A team of cavalrymen galloped out of the city, led by a young and handsome man. When he stopped in front of the ceremonial guard, he looked at Rong Chuxiu with a smile, which made people feel good at the first time, thinking that he was a man with a good temper and easy to get along with. I am Xiejin. The man introduced his identity and his voice was also very pleasant. The son of the chief minister of the Dongling cabinet, the then Minister of Justice, came to welcome His Majesty the Emperor of the Great Zhou by the order of Her Majesty the Queen and the Regent. As soon as the voice fell, the envoy of the Great Zhou was stunned. Rong Chuxiu's expression was also slightly strange. The son of the chief minister of the cabinet? The Minister of Justice? Why would the person who welcomed the envoy be the Minister of Justice? Even if the Chief Minister and the Prime Minister of the Cabinet did not come, it should be the Minister of Rights. Shouldn't it be the responsibility of the Ministry of Rights to welcome and entertain the envoy? While Rong Chuxiu was in a daze, Xiejin suddenly rode forward, and the Great Zhou Imperial Guard stood in formation, all drawing their swords to block the Emperor's carriage. Don't panic, everyone. Xiejin smiled, his delicate and noble features were particularly pleasing to the eye. I have something to say to His Majesty the Emperor alone. The great Zhou envoy frowned. What was there to say in secret? Rong Chuxia was silent for a moment, staring at Xiejin's handsome face that was so handsome that it angered both humans and gods, and nodded slowly. It's okay, let Mr. Xie come over. The imperial guards were alert and slowly stepped back. It's not a coincidence that His Majesty the Emperor has come. I want to remind you. Xiejin rode up to him and lowered his voice. The Empress is pregnant. If everything goes well, a new prince will be born today. I heard that His Majesty the Emperor called my regent uncle, so congratulations to the Emperor on having another brother. After the voice fell, he turned around and raised his hand without paying attention to Rong Chuxia, who was stunned by this, and said, "Welcome His Majesty the Emperor of the Great Zhou to the palace." He took the lead and entered the city first. The Great Zhou monarch's ceremonial procession, which had been left out for half a day outside the imperial city, finally slowly started to move and went into the city. Rong Chuxia sat in the carriage and suddenly came back to his senses after a long time. The Empress has a child again? He was so lucky that he happened to catch up with the birth of the prince in the ant's belly today. What kind of luck is this? No wonder the uncle didn't move for a long time. He thought he did something wrong, or that he didn't even say hello and suddenly came to dangling. This action made the uncle unhappy, so he deliberately left him out of the imperial city. I didn't expect to catch up with the birth of the imperial ant. Rong Chuxia shouted at Xiejin's back, "Master Xie." Hearing the voice, Xiejin turned his horse and looked at Rong Chuxia in confusion. What instructions does the emperor have? Rong Chuxia raised his hand and waved at him. Xiejin raised his eyebrows. Is he calling a cat or a dog? But the guest is a guest, and he is also the nephew of his master, so he should give him some face, right? Xiejin rode back to him and walked side by side without haste. What does the emperor want to say? Rong Chuxia asked gently, how is the regent recently? Is he in a good mood? Very good, Her Majesty is also fine. Xiejin cooperated very well. It's just a coincidence today. It doesn't matter if it's a coincidence. Anyway, it's a happy event for the imperial ant to give birth to a child. Before the birth, the imperial uncle is inevitably worried. When the child is born, the imperial uncle should also be happy. Rong Chuxia thought for a moment. There are no other husbands in the harem of Her Majesty, right? Husband? Xiejin raised his eyebrows and glanced at him lightly. What does His Majesty think? Rong Chuxia frowned. With his understanding of his uncle, it would be absolutely impossible for His Majesty to have other people in the harem of His Majesty, but things could happen. If the ministers of Dongling pressed hard. No, Xiejin replied simply, the regent is jealous and possessive, and does not allow any close men to appear around Her Majesty. You have to be on guard against those without a name, and it is even more impossible with a name. Rong Chuxia breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. How can this be good? Xiejin raised his eyebrows slightly. Why does His Majesty care so much about the harem of the queen? Of course he has to care, that's his uncle and aunt. The uncle and regent are doing well, so he can avoid being punished for coming here uninvited, otherwise he dare not imagine what kind of treatment he will get. Rong Chuxia glanced at him. Are you the Minister of Justice? Xiejin nodded. Then welcoming the envoys of other kings should not be your responsibility. Indeed, Xiejin nodded. Does His Majesty the Emperor think it's inappropriate? Rong Chuxia guessed. Are you someone the regent trusts more? Xiejin raised his lips. I guess so. Rong Chuxia looked at him carefully and found that this man was really handsome and his temperament was also rare and outstanding. Mr. Xie has been married. Xiejin paused. Why? The Great Zhou and Dongling may be able to get married. Rong Chuxia pondered. The queen and the regent will definitely not be able to remarry. If Mr. Xie is interested. I don't mean that. I'm sorry to disappoint His Majesty the Emperor, Xiejin said calmly, but if His Majesty the Emperor is interested, come here to see if there is a noble lady from Dongling who suits your taste. You can take one back and make her a concubine or something. It can also be regarded as achieving the purpose of marriage between the two countries. In fact, he and the emperor are also a little related by marriage. After all, his mother is from the royal family of the Great Zhou, but there is no need to deliberately mention this. The imperial procession entered the palace in a grand procession. Prime Minister Xie, Prince Jing, and Prime Minister Liu, along with several important officials and officials from the Ministry of Rites, were waiting at the palace gate to welcome the Emperor of the Great Zhou. The reason why the etiquette was so grand was naturally because of the special friendly relationship between the Great Zhou and Dongling. Even if it was just for the sake of the regent, they had to entertain the emperor from the Great Zhou well and never let him think that he was being neglected. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 718. Rong Chuxiu was a little flattered. Although he was already the emperor, this was his first mission to another country, whether before or after he ascended the throne, and Dongling was the territory of the emperor's uncle and his aunt. These ministers were so polite to him that they actually gave him a child. There was an illusion that the emperor's uncle was amiable. The envoys of the great Zhou dynasty followed His Majesty the Emperor into the palace. Xie Xiaofu said as he walked, "I have wronged His Majesty the Emperor today. The situation is really special. The regent has no intention to pay attention to external matters, so he neglected His Majesty the Emperor and asked the Emperor and the envoys to please forgive me for waiting outside for so long, His Majesty the Emperor and all the envoys." Rong Chuxiu said hurriedly, "It doesn't matter. His Majesty the Emperor has come all the way here, and there should be a state banquet in Dongling. However, today we can only give in to His Majesty the Emperor and the envoys, and wait for the regent and Her Majesty the Queen to free up dash." "It doesn't have to be too grand," Rong Chuxiu interrupted him quickly, "I just came here to see the Emperor's uncle and aunt. You're welcome from my own family. After the Emperor's aunt gives birth to the child, she will have to confine herself. She will not be able to see the wind for at least a month. It is difficult for him to be a man to see him in person. The Emperor's uncle has to take care of the Emperor's aunt. Can you spare time to visit him in the past few days?" Chu Xiu was not sure, so how could he dare to let Dongling host a state banquet? It can only be said that his arrival was unlucky and he did not choose the right time. Of course, it was also because the two countries were far away and he had no way of knowing that Her Majesty the Queen was pregnant, otherwise he would not have been able to come at this time. With his father and all the adults in the court here, Xiejin no longer has the need to stay. After completing the task of bringing His Majesty the Emperor into the palace, he plans to go to the Dajhan Palace to resume his duties. "Thank you, Mr. Xie." Rong Chuxiu saw Xiejin was about to leave, and quickly called out to him, "Are you going to see the regent?" Xiejin was silent for a moment and raised his eyebrows. "What? I'll go with you." Rong Chuxiu ignored the stunned expressions of other ministers and turned to order the envoy of the great Zhou dynasty. "You stay here and chat with the adults. I will come when I go." So under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes from the envoys of the Zhou dynasty and Dongling ministers, Rong Chuxiu left with Xiejin in such a swaggering manner, completely forgetting who was entertaining so many people. "His Majesty the Emperor is really approachable," Xiejin joked. "Are you in a hurry to pay your respects to the regent?" Rong Chuxiu glanced at him. "The Minister of Punishment should be a third-rank official, right?" Xiejin nodded. "Do you think it's appropriate for a third-grade official to talk to me like this?" Xiejin raised his eyebrows. "You want me to kneel down to His Majesty the Emperor?" "That's not necessary," Rong Chu corrected his expression, "but you can be a little more respectful to me. Except for Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent, Xie has never been respectful to anyone else in his life." Xiejin smiled lightly. "I'm afraid I will disappoint His Majesty the Emperor." Rong Chuxiu choked, with a subtle expression. "Master Xie looks very arrogant." The last four words rolled around on the tip of my tongue before they came out. Xiejin nodded slowly. Many people have said so. Rong Chuxiu paused, thinking that this man was too arrogant. He even wondered if the emperor's uncle and aunt were as arrogant when they first came to Dongling. I want to ask Mr. Xia a question. Xiejin nodded. Tell me everything you know, and tell me everything I know. When the emperor's uncle and the emperor's aunt first came to Dongling, were you so arrogant? Xiejin frowned slightly and couldn't help but look at him deeply. Rong Chuxiu was confused by him. What's wrong? Xiejin shook his head. Nothing. Rong Chuxiu frowned, feeling that something was not normal about him. Xiejin just wanted to say that the emperor is so cute, but considering that the other party is the king of a country after all, he should save some face for him, otherwise, well, that's not right. He is now a famous person, you can no longer talk nonsense to other men. Xiejin sighed deeply and involuntarily began to miss the little leopard in the military camp again. As soon as the two of them walked to the Dajhan palace, they heard Po Wen's voice shouting, "Give a baby, baby." Her Majesty the Queen gave birth to the prince safely. Congratulations to the Prince Regent. Congratulations to the Prince Regent. Rong Yu, who was dressed in light robes, breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards the palace without stopping. Naturally, there was a lot of cleaning and comforting next. The palace was so busy that the regent probably couldn't get out for a while. Xiejin stood outside the palace gate, listening to your movements, and said calmly, "Your Majesty, I am afraid that your trip will be in vain." Rong Chuxiu also breathed a sigh of relief, with a smile on his face. It doesn't matter, the safety of the emperor's mother and son is more important than anything else. Xiejin thought for a while, shall I take the emperor to see His Highness the Crown Prince? Rong Chuxiu's eyes brightened, and he nodded quickly, that's what I meant. By the way, I also brought a gift for my little cousin, and I will have it delivered to the Dajhan Palace later. The little prince is about 2 years old, and he has already started studying. Have you practiced martial arts yet? The emperor's uncle should be able to teach his son such a powerful skill. However, His Highness the Crown Prince was born with a noble status and was raised according to the standards of a prince. So he will definitely not have as much time to practice martial arts as the emperor's uncle. No matter how hard he works, he will probably only inherit half of the inheritance from his father. Ability. However, for a king of a country, it is already very remarkable that he can actually learn half of Rong Yu's skills. After all, he does not go to the border to fight, and his skills can only protect himself. Moreover, there are experts inside and outside the palace to protect him, so there is no need to do it himself. Something. The two of them went to visit the little prince who was in class. In the inner hall of Dajhan Palace, the midwife and the palace servants carefully helped the queen clean up her body. Rong Yu stood in the outer hall holding his newborn son. Because Hao-er was still young, he clearly remembered how Hao-er looked when he was just born, so he didn't think he was so ugly when he looked at such a young child at this time. However, men had little experience in this area, and no matter how hard they looked at him, they couldn't figure out who the newborn baby's facial features looked like. Rong Yu waited for a while. After the palace servants were done and cleaned up the queen, Rong Yu walked into the inner hall with the child in his arms. He sat down on the small stool in front of the bed and looked at Nan 11, who was sweating and pale. There was a heartache and panic in his eyes that had not completely faded. It seems to be smoother this time. Although he felt like he was living a year in anxiety for half a day, he said nothing at this time. Nan 11's safety was more important than anything else, and the worry was over. Nan 11 nodded. Do you still think your son is ugly this time? Rong Yu was silent, and Yin Yu and the palace people beside him laughed softly. They all remembered the wise and powerful regent holding the crown prince with a tangled look on his face, and asked the princess in a tactful way if she thought the child looked strange. At this time, when he heard Nan 11 bring up the old story again, Rong Yu couldn't help but laugh. Not ugly, as good looking as your majesty. Nan 11 smiled and asked Rong Yu to put the child next to her, and Rong Yu did so. Since this child is a general, let's name him Jean. Nan 11 stroked the child's face and said softly, Rong Jean. Rong Jean? Several midwives and wet nurses were slightly stunned, and couldn't help looking at the newborn baby next to the queen. His Majesty meant to let him take his father's surname. But he is the second prince of Dongling, shouldn't he be crowned with the surname of the Xianyuan royal family? No need. Rong Yu didn't care about it and didn't want to cause any trouble. Just call him Xianyuan Jean. Nan 11 thought for a while, use Xianyuan Jean in the royal family genealogy, but you can call him Rong Jean on weekdays. 11er Rong Yu's expression was subtle. I really don't think the surname is that important. I don't plan to pass on any family business, even if I want to pass it on. Isn't the family business of the Xianyuan royal family more important than a surname? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 719. It wasn't a question of whether the last name was important or not, but that she felt she had wronged him. Nan 11 frowned and thought for a while, then let's call him Xianyuan Rongzhan. Given their two surnames, Xianyuan Rongzhan will be used in the royal family tree, but Rongzhan can be called Rongzhan on weekdays. Rong Yu responded to her, I listen to you. I'm going to have to work hard on you again these 2 days. Rong Yu was amused by her words, I think taking care of you is easier than going to court. Nan 11 smiled and said, do you mean to suspend the court again? Yes. Rong Yu gently stroked her sweat-wet hair, we can let Xie Xiaofu share more of the government affairs. Master Qingyang asked for instructions outside, are you going to host a banquet for the Emperor of Zhou and his envoys tonight? Nan 11 was stunned, Emperor of Zhou dynasty. Rong Yu frowned slightly, it seems that Chu Xiu is here. Like. Nan 11 was stunned. The emperor of a great country arrived in person. It should be considered a big event, right? How little does he care about his nephew? Rong Yu was silent for a moment, he came at the wrong time. It is indeed not the right time. Nan 11 nodded slowly, but it is not easy for him to come here. The fact that he can come now proves that the situation of the great Zhou dynasty should be stabilized, and his power is considered secure. Rong Yu said nothing, holding her hand in distress. But then again, he is not a fortune teller, how can he figure out when I will give birth? Nan 11 laughed, as long as the country of Dazhu is stable, nothing else matters. They should be happy for him. Rong Yu said calmly, I have left him so many reliable loyal ministers and good generals. If he still can't do it well, what is the difference between him and a waste? Nan 11 was speechless for a moment. You should rest first, don't think too much. Rong Yu didn't want her to be too tired, so he stood up and handed the child to the wet nurse, then sat back down next to Nan 11, I'm here to accompany you. Nan 11 smiled and shook her head, you go and do your work first. If the wet nurse needs to do anything else later, it will be inconvenient for you to stay here. Besides, I just gave birth to a baby, and the hall cannot be ventilated for the time being, so the smell here is really not good. Rong Yu pursed her thin lips, not trusting to leave her alone. Every time Nan 11 gave birth to a child, it was a physical and mental torture for him. He was afraid that something would happen to her. Thinking of Jean Ruo's prophecy, Rong Yu frowned slightly, 11er. 2 children are enough, 1 emperor star and 1 general star. They are enough to manage Dongling in an orderly manner and protect thousands of people. Can we not have a daughter? Rong Yu discussed with her, the birth of a daughter may mean some changes, and it may even make us parents face separation between life and death. I don't want to see you suffer like that. After experiencing the pain of giving birth to a child, and then a separation of life and death more than 10 years later. Wrong, you couldn't watch her go through this, and would rather not have a daughter, as long as Nan 11 was safe and happy for a while. Nan 11 was silent for a moment and nodded gently. We don't have to, and I will try my best to be more careful in the future, but if I get pregnant, just let nature take its course. Wrong, you thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. He wouldn't let her get pregnant again. Okay, you go out and deal with things outside. Nan 11 shook his hand. I'll take a nap. Wrong, you hummed, I'll be back soon. In the study room, Rong Chuxia was staring at 2-year-old Hauer for a long time. He couldn't believe that there were two people who looked so similar in the world. Is His Majesty the Emperor frightened? Xiejin sat aside and raised his lips carelessly. Have you seen a smaller version of your imperial uncle? Rong Chuxia slowly came back to his senses, reached out to hug Hauer, tentatively reached out and pinched his face. It's so cute. Hauer looked at him with a sullen face. Xiejin raised his eyebrows. Cute, the young crown prince smiled with interest. If His Majesty the Emperor likes it, can you hold him and coax him for the whole day? Rong Chuxia was silent for a moment, looking at Hauer's face as cold as a jade sculpture, and slowly shook his head. Let's forget it. He likes it, but he can't bear the pressure. Who can tell him why Hauer has not inherited Nan 11's gentleness and kindness at all? Not only does his facial features resemble his uncle's, but his expression, charm, and demeanor are exactly the same as his uncle's. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, it would have been hard for him to believe that a 2-year-old child couldn't laugh no matter how much he was teased. Moreover, the way he looked at him just now seemed to be an idiot, which seriously affected His Majesty as an emperor. Why did His Majesty the Emperor suddenly want to come to Dongling? Xian Yuanqi asked with a smile. Is the country of Great Zhou stable? Rong Chuxia glanced at him. Are you the crown prince now? Xian Yuanqi nodded. Responsible for teaching literature classes. Xian Yuan prayed. I can also do martial arts. I didn't expect Mr. Fukan to be a man with both civil and military skills. Rong Chuxia sighed softly. You were born in a noble family in Dongling. How come you were reduced to singing in the Dazhu theater? Xian Yuanqi glanced at him. You are now the emperor and the nephew of the regent. Based on Dongling's hospitality, I am not as knowledgeable as you. Rong Chuxia frowned. What do you mean by not being on the same level as him? Your Majesty, Emperor Zhou, thank you, sir. The guard came in and reported, the regent wants you to go to the Kinzen Palace. Xiejin raised his eyebrows slightly and went to the Kinzen Hall. Your Majesty, won't you stay at Taisho Palace to accompany Your Majesty the Queen? Got it, he responded and said to Rong Chuxia, Your Majesty, please. Rong Chuxia handed Hauer back to Xian Yuanqi. Although he couldn't help wanting to kiss him, he resisted the urge several times when he saw Hauer's face that looked like Rong Yu. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 720. The envoys of the Great Zhou dynasty were temporarily settled. In addition to the 20 people who followed Rong Chuxia, the emperor's imperial guards were also settled in Guangyang Palace with the envoys. Xiejin walked into Kinzen Hall with Rong Chuxia and found that his master was actually criticizing the book, and Xian Yuanchen was also there. Well, in the past 2 days, due to Nan 11's labor, there has been a lot of government affairs. The chief minister and the prime minister have taken care of all the things that can be handled. They have shared a large part of it for His Majesty and the regent, but there are still some ministers. If they can't handle it, they will fall on the imperial case. Uncle Emperor Rong Chuxia walked into the main hall under the guidance of the chamberlain. He approached the imperial case and saw the man sitting behind the case. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Well, I didn't know that the emperor's aunt was pregnant. I didn't choose to be here on purpose. Come and make trouble. Rong Yu's eyebrows were stern, but she ignored him and threw a secret report to Xiejin. You and Xian Yuanchen will set off for me and Zhou immediately. Later, I will ask Chu Nanyi to transport relief materials. Follow up, we will also send someone to coordinate with you on all matters. Mianzhou. Xiejin's heart sank slightly. He unfolded the secret report and frowned. Flood. Rong Chuxiu was stunned. As soon as he came, he caught up with the disaster in Dongling. Mianzhou is located in the middle and lower reaches of the Burmese River. If there was a flood in the Burmese River in the past, the four cities of Mianzhou would be the first to suffer, Xian Yuanchen said in a deep voice. When the Supreme Emperor was in power, he sent special officials to control the water, which cost a lot of money. With great efforts and money, Mianzhou has not had any floods for 3 consecutive years. However, the main factor is that Mianzhou has had good weather in the past 3 years and there has been no unusual heavy rain. However, the weather in the Mianzhong area this year seems not to be good, so it happened. Something like this. Xiejin frowned. There is less than a month left before the crops are harvested. This flood will not only submerge the houses of the people in Mianzhou, but I am afraid that all the food that is about to mature will also rot in the ground. Fortunately, the secret report came in time, Rong Yu said in an indifferent voice. You guys set off immediately, resettle the victims first, and transport the local emergency food supplies. Be sure to minimize casualties. The disaster could not be delayed, so Xiejin immediately accepted the order. I will go and make arrangements immediately. Control local food prices and don't allow anyone to take advantage of the disaster to drive up food prices. Anyone who dares to test the law will be put in jail. Rong Yu frowned. Teacher of Chuanwu Pavilion. Yes. Soon a guard went to the Wuge to teach the grand instructor. As soon as he entered the Kinzen Hall, the grand instructor heard the regent's instructions. Take Xiejin to the Wuge to select 6 shadow guards and go with them to Mianzhou. When you meet officials who do not cooperate, may use force. I obey my orders. Rong Yu was silent for a moment, then raised his eyes to look at Xiejin and Xian Yuanchen. I give you the greatest authority to act. You know what you should and should not do when you arrive in Mianzhou. Xiejin accepted the order seriously. I dare not let my lord down. Go ahead. I excuse myself. The two of them turned around and walked out of the Kinzen Hall together, and went to select the shadow guards with the great master. They would set off to Mianzhou tonight to solve the Mianzhou flood. Rong Chuxiu also wanted to turn around and leave. He came at a really bad time. Not only did he catch up with the imperial ant giving birth, but he also caught up with the Dongling natural disaster. What kind of bad luck did he have? Isn't it good for him to just stay in the Zhou Palace and handle government affairs? Fortunately, this flood occurred in Tanglin. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? It doesn't matter which country it happened in. The people who suffered were the common people. But if it happened in the Zhou dynasty, the emperor would obviously have neglected his duties. He expected that those officials in the court who could not even make up their minds might be overwhelmed by their talents. Report the news. And if he appears in Dongling at this time, there is no telling how the emperor's uncle will kill him. Rong Yu told Qing Yang, send Chu Nanyi and Mo Lingan to enter the palace. Yes. The great Zhou dynasty has been in peace and prosperity recently. Rong Yu finally raised his head to look at Rong Chuxiu and said in a calm voice, is the court stable? Rong Chuxiu nodded, yes. Where are those people who want the throne? Rong Yudan asked, have they all settled down? They have to settle down. Rong Chuxiu suddenly felt a lot of pressure after listening to his questions. He nodded calmly. After the emperor's uncle and the emperor's aunt left the Zhou dynasty, I reorganized the court. Loyal and reliable people have been assigned to the central positions, and the Ling brothers are in charge of the military power. For the time being, there will be no problems. The Ling family's military power cannot be too great. Rong Yu reminded lightly, Ling Ling's position can be adjusted appropriately. Rong Chuxiu nodded slowly, I understand what the emperor means, uncle, don't worry. Having held the military power for a long time, it is inevitable to support the troops with self-respect. Although the emperor has to trust those who use them and do not use those who doubt him, he should always be prepared to take precautions in everything. Instead of waiting for the unexpected to happen, the emperor will face uncontrollable events. The situation can only give rise to murderous intent, so it is better to prepare in advance. Ling Ling and Ling Fan were both generals promoted by Rong Yu. One was in charge of the imperial army and the other was in charge of the army. This meant that the military defenses inside and outside the imperial city of Zhou dynasty were all under the control of the Ling brothers. This was by no means something that the king could do. Something reassuring. But for now, there is no problem. Ling Ling and Ling Fan's loyalty is unquestionable. Even if their positions need to be adjusted, there must be suitable candidates. Rong Chuxiu continued, I have demoted several ministers in the court who had disloyal intentions for some reason. The forces belonging to King Ning and King Qi have been constrained, and no disturbance can arise. Rong Yu leaned on the chair and looked at him expressionlessly for a moment. Rong Chuxiu's scalp was numb when he saw him, and then he said lightly, he does have a bit of an emperor's demeanor. Rong Chuxiu said respectfully, Uncle Huang taught me well. No need to flatter you, I don't have time to teach you. Rong Yu's voice was indifferent, he stood up and walked around the imperial case, I have ordered a banquet to entertain you, a distinguished guest of the Zhou dynasty. After the banquet, I will arrange for several ministers to take you there. Let's wander around the Dongling imperial city and go back after 3 to 5 days. If there's nothing important to do in the future, don't learn how to travel to other countries. Rong Chuxiu walked out with him. Didn't the emperor's uncle often take the emperor's aunt to play before? I have the ability to protect your aunt, but you have the ability to protect yourself. Rong Yu tilted her head and looked at him, do you think I have ever mobilized an army like you? Rong Chuxiu was speechless. The emperor's uncle always obeyed with ease, but wasn't that because of his high martial arts skills? Moreover, they were all accompanied by masters, and no one knew their whereabouts when traveling with their identities concealed. Moreover, it was indeed more convenient to travel with a light vehicle than to mobilize an army with a large number of people. When it came to their whereabouts, it seemed that the emperor's uncle had very good intelligence. With a slight shift in his mind, Rong Chuxiu couldn't help but think of the flood just now. Why didn't the emperor choose to bring up the Mianzhou flood, a major issue related to people's livelihood, in the morning? The local memorial reporting the flooding has not yet arrived. The memorial hasn't come yet? If the officials are unreliable, the memorials they submit will inevitably be embellished. What the king knows is only the tip of the iceberg, which may be very different from the truth. Rong Yu said calmly, and disaster relief is a difficult task for many officials. It is said to be the best time to be greedy. The food money allocated by the court cannot withstand the secret deductions by the officials below. The matter is being discussed in the court before the memorial is submitted. Do you think the news will leak out soon? Rong Chuxiu's heart was shaken. The emperor is wise. Secretly sending people to deal with this matter, the local officials were not yet prepared. Xiejing could better understand the disaster situation, the situation of the people, and the character and performance of local officials. By the time the memorial was presented to heaven, officials from all over the country had already done enough. Without preparations, what they see when they send the imperial envoy down will not be the real situation. The local officials will definitely try their best to cover it up, and even secretly arrange forces to create artificial obstacles for the imperial envoy and increase the difficulty of disaster relief. In terms of disaster relief food funds, some people will also be fully prepared to withhold money, and it will be the disaster-stricken people who will suffer.